A couple of hours from now, the G20 leaders will be holding a virtual summit to discuss the coronavirus outbreak. World leaders, including Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Boris Johnson and Narendra Modi, will attempt to chalk out a joint strategy against the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Saudi Arabia's King Salman will be presiding over the summit. Ahead of the meeting, King Salman put out this tweet where he said that the virtual summit would lead to a global response against the pandemic. In the absence of a UN General Assembly or UN Security Council meeting, this is the closest the world has come to a joint response. Our sources have told WION that the G20 will announce a global action plan after the summit later today. The major hurdle during these virtual talks will be the spiraling US-China ties. In January, Donald Trump was all praise for Xi Jinping and China's response to the virus, but his tone has changed significantly over the last few weeks. According to the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the G7 countries believe that China is running a disinformation campaign to avoid blame over the virus.
There was a lot of discussion today amongst the G7 about the intentional disinformation campaign that China has been and continues to be engaged in. You see it in social media, you see it in remarks from senior people inside the Chinese Communist Party talking about whether this was a U.S. brought to China. I mean, this is crazy talk. And every member of the G7 today saw that this is disinformation campaign.
As the United Nations, China has consistently managed to keep COVID-19 off the agenda. Now, this virtual G20 summit gives countries the chance to hold China accountable for downplaying the virus back in December and January. It's important to remember that the US and China were on the cusp of completing a historic trade deal before the outbreak. It remains to be seen now how the two countries will move ahead on that front. WION's principal diplomatic correspondent, Saud Sybil, gets us more on this.
The emergency G20 COVID summit is all set to take place today. This will be for the first time that the G20 countries are going to meet through video conference. The idea was discussed by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi with his G20 counterparts, also with the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the chair of G20 Saudi Arabia. The focus will be a joint G20 strategy to deal with this global crisis. We know that the G20 countries are all set to announce an action plan, a G20 action plan on COVID crisis. The Indian Prime Minister has already been having video conferencing with world leaders. He had proposed a SAARC video conference earlier this month, and all the SAARC leaders participated in it at heads of government and state level, barring of course Pakistan, who sent a junior representative. We also know that India announced a COVID emergency fund and said that its rapid response team will be available for all the countries, the SAARC countries, so that they can make sure that this crisis does not spread. We also know that the United Nations has been found missing at this time of global crisis. The United Nations Security Council was expected to come out with a statement, but few countries weren't happy with the draft statement, and that is why they have to still come up with a joint statement, and there is a considerable delay in that. With video journalist Neeraj Patel, Saud Sybil for WION in New Delhi.